Hey, I'm Nancy Cavey, National ERISA and Individual Disability Attorney. Welcome to Winning Isn't Easy. Before we get started today, I've got to give you a legal disclaimer. This podcast isn't legal advice. The Florida Bar Association tells me that I've got to say this. Now that I've said it, nothing is ever going to prevent me from giving you an easy to understand overview of the disability insurance world, the games that disability carriers play, and what you need to know to get the disability benefits you deserve. So off we go. Today, I'm going to be talking about functional capacity evaluations and the impact the results of an FCE can have on your disability insurance claim. There are three specific topics I'm going to be talking about. First, the answers to the 8 most commonly asked questions about a disability insurance company's functional capacity evaluation test. 2, what are the 5 things that happen during a disability insurance company functional capacity evaluation? And the story of an executive sous chef with osteomyelitis who was wrongfully denied his long-term disability benefits by Hartford based on their functional capacity evaluation. Let's take a break for a moment before we get started with this week's episode. Welcome back to Winning Isn't Easy. What are the 5 things that can happen during the course of a disability insurance company's functional capacity evaluation? When you apply for your disability insurance benefits, you have to prove that you meet the definition of disability. Now, it might be an own occupation definition of disability, where you have to show you can't do the material and substantial duties of your own occupation, or you might be at the any occupation stage, where you have to establish that you can't do any other occupation based on your education, your experience, and your restrictions and limitations. So remember, at all times, your functionality, your physical abilities are going to be at question. The FCE is a way to objectively measure your restrictions and limitations. And many times your physicians has relied on your subjective complaints about your abilities in rendering an opinion about your functional capabilities. And there are times when you need to have an FCE to prove your own restrictions and limitations, where there are times when the disability carrier exercises their right to question your capabilities by having a functional capacity evaluation. The FCE may be performed by an occupational therapist, a physical therapist, and in rare instances, a physician. Now, if possible, you should videotape that FCE. And if not, you should be consulting with an experienced ERISA disability attorney who can help you set up your own functional capacity evaluation and explain to you some of the ways that you can protect yourself during the FCE. Now, what's the first thing that's going to happen potentially during this FCE? The FCE provider can ask you to complete forms about your medical condition, your limitations, your vocational background. These forms are traps. I insist that the carrier send me all of these forms in advance so that we can complete them and make sure that they are consistent not only with your medical records, but what you've put in the activity of daily living form. Now, if there are questions about the vocational issues, I always refer the FCE provider to the occupational history that we've completed as part of the application process, or tell them to contact their client who set up the FCE. Now, some of the forms that the FCE provider may ask you to do are not really forms, but they're psychological and malingering tests. For example, there's something called the McGill Pain Questionnaire. You do not want to complete them. If the FCE provider says that you have to and they won't do the FCE, then you stop and say, I'm going to consult with a lawyer. I'm more than happy to cooperate with the physical exam, but I'm not completing the psychological or malingering test that you want done until I consult with my lawyer. Now, why do they want you to do these malingering or psychological tests? They're looking to peg you as a liar. They're looking to peg you as someone who's exaggerating. They're looking to peg you as someone who is malingering. And we don't want to help them by doing these kinds of tests. So tests like the McGill is a trap for unworried disability claimants who are really setting themselves up for a claim denial. What's the second thing that's going to happen? Where they're going to interview about your medical conditions, limitations, and vocational background. To me, this interview is a test of consistency. What have you said in the past about your medical conditions, your limitations and vocational background? What are you telling them today? Now, as I've said many times, I think that IME's functional capacity evaluations, they all should be videotaped. And if you can't, at least record the conversation. If you can't, we want to try to have a representative, like a nurse present. And if that doesn't work, we want our own FCE to be done several days before the carrier's FCE. What's the third thing? They might want to try to review your medical records with you. Now, the carrier should have sent your medical records to the FCE provider, so don't bring them. But if the FCE provider wants to discuss your medical records, tell them to put their questions in writing and you'll answer them in a letter after the functional capacity evaluation. And don't be tempted to correct what's in your medical records or the functional capacity evaluator's interpretation of your medical records. If you do any of those things, you're falling into the disability carrier's trap. What's the third thing? The fourth thing. They're going to test your ability to perform activities like lifting, carrying, pushing, pulling, walking, standing, balancing, kneeling, crouching, crawling, and manipulating objects. Now I want you to think backwards. What are the occupational duties you can't do? Let's say you may have difficulty sitting, standing, lifting, or a combination of those things. If the FCE provider doesn't test for the right types of duties or combination of duties or the kinds of breaks that you need, I'm going to ultimately argue that this FCE is invalid. Now, the FCE provider is most likely going to reach a conclusion about the range of your abilities. And at a minimum, they're going to say that you can do a full range of sedentary work, particularly if you're at the any occupation stage. But they're most likely are going to say that you can do the full range of physical activity that your occupation requires. If they don't accurately test your abilities, I think that the FCE test is invalid. And I don't want you to help them by correcting your medical records or telling them, well, this isn't quite the way that I do my job, or I'm having difficulty doing this or that, so let's test this. You're not helping yourself. You're setting yourself up for a claims denial. Those are the kinds of things you do with your own FCE provider, not with a disability carrier's provider. Number 5, tracking your pain level. Now, there is a subjective component to a functional capacity evaluation. The therapist is going to assess whether you're giving full effort and whether your pain complaints are consistent with the heart rate measurements or blood pressure measurements that they're being taken during the course of the FCE. They will try to determine whether your pain level is truly preventing you from completing a task. And in my opinion, they're not competent or qualified to evaluate one person's pain or to interpret these ratings and relate them to a level of pain. Pain is unique to you, yet functional capacity evaluators will draw conclusions about exaggeration that can lead to a claims denial. So I don't want you to fall in that trap. However, I don't want you to exaggerate. I don't want you to moan and groan and act like you really are a pain in the butt as opposed to having real pain. I want you to be giving full effort. I suggest that you consider keeping a log of your pain levels for a week before the FCE in terms of the location of your pain, the intensity, and the frequency of your problems. When you get into the FCE, you also want to try to keep a log either there or immediately after the functional capacity evaluation. And certainly I would want you to keep that log for the week after the functional capacity evaluation. You might not be in a lot of pain before the FCE, and the FCE may increase the pain. Or you might not be in pain during the FCE, but your pain can return, or it can be dialed up. We want to document that. So those are the 5 things that can happen to you during the course of a carrier's disability functional capacity evaluation. In my next segment, I'm going to talk about the story of an executive sous chef who had osteomyelitis, and he was wrongfully denied his long-term disability benefits by Hartford as a result of an FCE. We'll learn about the games that disability carriers play with FCEs. Let's take a break.